What's up, guys? It's Randa, and we are back at it today with Fear Street Part 3, 1666, and we finally have all of our answers about how this trilogy and the history of Shadyside ties together. I will say, there is another storm outside. I hope it's not too disruptive, but as it is the summer in the South, we get a torrential downpour every 5 minutes, so if I waited to film this video until there wasn't one, I would never film it. So, it is what it is. Please bear with me if you can pick it up on my mic. After a quick recap of everything that's happened thus far, we open right back in Shadyside in 1666, then called Union, right where we left off with Sarah Fear at the end of Part 2. Now for reference, although it is Dina's actress from Part 1 and Part 2 portraying Sarah Fear in this, it is Sarah's history and backstory, so I will of course be referring to her as Sarah, as well as to all of the recurring actors and actresses from Part 1 and Part 2. I will be referring to them as the names of their 1666 counterparts, just to say that up front to avoid any confusion, but carrying on. As Sarah is leaned over the trough of water, holding a knife and covered in blood, we hear somebody calling her name from over her shoulder, and although this initially feels very ominous, we very quickly learn it's a fake out because the person calling out to her is her brother Henry, and it turns out that one of the pigs in their homestead is giving birth, and he needs her help with the last piglet, so that's where all of the blood on her came from, and it's, nothing ominous or insidious at all. I really didn't think a pig C-section was what we were going to get within the first 3 minutes of this, but I guess horror is all about catching you off guard. We cut to Sarah's father complimenting her skills on pig birthing, which I guess was a more relevant skill back then, and she gathers up one of the piglets and tells him she is taking it to her friend Solomon Good. Her dad is dropping some not-so-subtle hints about how after the death of his wife and child, Solomon needs somebody to take care of him, but Sarah is having none of that and tells him in no uncertain terms that she will not be marrying Solomon Good. Wonder why that is. As Sarah strolls through the town, we get a sense of the small, hard-working community around her. She passes one of her friends, Lizzie, and they exchange some coded phrases about the full moon before Lizzie covertly flashes a bottle of something that's hidden in her basket. Sarah then encounters another one of her friends, Isaac, and they exchange the same phrases about the moon. We then cut to some of the town's children playing and reciting this little silly rhyme about the pastor, Cyrus Miller, led by another town girl, Constance, before the pastor kind of jokingly startles them and they run off. Abigail, Constance's sister, then grabs her and reprimands her right before they greet Sarah, and they exchange the same coded phrases. Constance insists that she's coming this time, and when Abigail refuses, Constance threatens to tell their mother what's going on before the two girls hurry off. From a distance, Sarah spots Hannah Miller, the pastor's daughter, and when she approaches, Hannah says the same phrases about the full moon, but this time, Sarah sounds shocked to hear that Hannah is planning to go. Hannah shares some details about how Lizzie is planning to go trade something with the town hag that night, and Sarah warns Hannah about how it will look if the pastor's daughter is caught trading with the hag. There's actually kind of like a whole flirtatious tone to this whole exchange, and they kind of keep edging closer to one another throughout this whole conversation, but they're right as Hannah is saying that she'll only go if Sarah goes, they're interrupted by Hannah's mother coming outside and ordering Hannah back into the house. As Sarah walks away, a clearly drunk man, Thomas, stumbles out of the outhouse and immediately dials the creep factor up to 11 with her. There's nothing sexier than a drunk, filthy man who immediately touches your face right after leaving an outhouse. Anyway, there's a really threatening tone to this whole exchange, with Thomas saying he knows all of her secrets and sees everything that goes on in Union, but Sarah is pretty much dismissive as she brushes him off. However, the very reasonable Thomas grabs her as she tries to walk away and warns that he sees the darkness inside of her, and he only laughs and warns her when she shoves him and hurries off into the woods. Solomon lives on his own out in the woods, and as Sarah calls out to him and approaches his house, we see 2 graves on the property, obviously of his late wife and child. Solomon insists that the piglet is too much of a gift, and Sarah jokes that to hear her father tell it, they're practically married anyway. Solomon also mentions that his brother wants him to move back to Union because he's dismissive of Solomon's chosen life as a farmer. As Sarah's about to leave, Solomon says the same line about the full moon, but unlike the others, he actually warns her against the woods, and Sarah plays coy before she leaves. After nightfall, Sarah waits at her window until she sees a light come on in the Miller home, but before she can sneak out, her brother Henry catches her and warns her against going. Of course, she goes anyway, so we cut to Hannah, Sarah, and Lizzie walking through the woods, talking about the berries they're hoping to get from the widow Mary and the effect they're supposed to have, because no matter the time period, we can always trust humans to figure out hallucinogenics and other mind-altering substances. Lizzie is repeating some of the rumors that go around town about the town widow, such as that she's 1,000 years old and she bathes in the blood of virgins in order to maintain her youth. Who knew that the Countess Elizabeth Bathory moved out into the woods, right? Hey? Everyone loves a history joke, right? Cool. They get a lot less jovial when they arrive at the widow Mary's house, and she seems to not be home, so Lizzie dispatches all of them to spread out and look for the berries they're hoping to get from her. You know, because casual theft always goes over so well. While searching, Sarah comes across a box, and inside of that box, she finds a book that has what we recognize as the witch's mark on the cover of it. While flipping through the book, she finds a page titled A Simple Exchange, which seems to depict a ritual or a trade of some kind, and she reads off the name of several demons that are listed on the page at the bottom of it that then ends with Satan's name. Widow Mary catches Sarah and warns her against the book, saying that the devil lives in it. Backing Sarah into a corner and holding a knife to her, she ominously imparts that the devil senses Sarah now and that she should be careful, otherwise he will work his way under her skin and consume her from within. So, you know, that definitely sounds like something you should be keeping in your home. Hannah thankfully interrupts them, and then Mary rushes all of them out of her home. We cut to a clearing in the woods where the youth of the town have obviously made use of nights like this in order to relax and unwind from the pressures of their stricter society, as we see them all, you know, drinking and making out and just generally having fun and letting loose. When the three girls arrive, Lizzie offers the berries to their small group of friends, and then we see a whole montage of them enjoying the effects of the berries on them, with the world all, you know, hazy and blurry around them as they enjoy the celebration. Although we see Sarah and Hannah being slowly drawn towards each other throughout this, Hannah is suddenly grabbed by a young man, Caleb, who tries to coerce her into the woods with him. After Hannah rejects his advances, he gets more forceful with her and tries to pull her into the woods with him anyway, and then Sarah intervenes and pushes him away. After he taunts Sarah, she returns and slaps him across the face, which honestly, solid one. She then taunts him in return, which humiliates him when all the other gathered people laugh at him. It cuts to Sarah and Hannah running through the woods and laughing together, and even if it was initially the effects of the berries that helped them to loosen up, it's clear that there's a genuine pull between the two of them as they share a quieter moment. Hannah actually kisses Sarah, and even though Sarah offers like a half-hearted remark about how they shouldn't because it's wrong, Hannah tells Sarah that she'll stop if Sarah tells her to. And let's just say, Sarah does not tell her to. A twig snaps behind them right as things are getting really heated, and we see a dark silhouette run off into the woods, and it unnerves the girls enough that they run off back towards the town. Hannah is, of course, terrified that someone might have seen them, and understandably so, because if someone tells on them, they'll be hanged. Sarah is much more brash about it, essentially saying that the danger is worth it if it means she can be with Sarah. And as they share another kiss, thinking that they're alone for sure this time, we then see Thomas watching them from a distance and laughing to himself. The next morning, Sarah can't find her dog, Mary Boy, and she's searching for him around the house when Hannah arrives and says that something's wrong with her father. Back at the Miller home, we see Cyrus sitting alone and muttering to himself, and we see flies buzzing around as he's hearing these indistinct whispers in his head, and then we even see like rotten fruit on the table. You know, this is really familiar behavior. Hannah says it only started that morning, but she already feels as if someone is almost taking control of her father because he's certainly not himself. You know, almost like possession. Hannah is searching for a passage in the Bible that will help, but Sarah tells her that her father needs real medicine. Wow, being a woman and believing in medicine in the 1600s? No wonder Sarah got hanged as a witch. Sarah offers to talk to Hannah's mother, but Hannah quickly shoots down this offer, revealing that she's actually not supposed to see Sarah anymore because her mother has suspicions about their relationship. Hannah even wonders if their so-called wickedness has somehow caused this and brought it upon her father, but Sarah reassures her and promises her that everything will be all right. That is a promise that is immediately broken when Hannah's mother storms in and throws Sarah to the ground before backhanding Hannah. She then tells them that Thomas saw them the night before and is now telling the entire town about them. Thanks, Thomas! When Goody Miller physically throws Sarah out of her home, we see that everyone in the town who's out and about has stopped to stare at Sarah as she hurries back to her own home. But unfortunately, there is no solace to be found there either, as her father immediately confronts her about what Thomas told him. He laments the loss of Sarah's mother, saying that there has always been a strangeness about Sarah that maybe a mother could have corrected, and that he feels that he has failed in raising her by himself as a single father. Once he's stormed off, Sarah sees that all of the food left out on the table has impossibly rotted and molded in that short time, with flies and other bugs all around it. Outside, things are no better, as Henry frantically calls for Sarah, and when she goes outside, she finds that the pig has eaten all of its piglets. Sarah is having none of this strangeness because she demands Henry bring her the axe, and then she slaughters the pig herself. It's not just contained to Sarah and Henry's house, though, because back in town, we see Isaac bite into an apple that is rotted from the inside out, a horse going mad as people try to restrain it, and the town well is blocked, all while Thomas rants about wickedness. When they finally free the bucket in the well and manage to pull it back up, there is a dead dog trapped in it, the lost Mary boy that Sarah was looking for, which means that the town well is poisoned. Meanwhile, Thomas demands to know who invited the devil into their town. Later, back at home, Solomon pays Sarah a visit. He's brought her an engraved scabbard for her knife as a thank you gift, and it's then that she confides in him about the night before and seeing the figure in the woods. With so many things going wrong in town, Sarah is worried that there's something wrong with her and that she has somehow brought this upon Union. Solomon reassures her, saying that her feelings for Hannah are only a dalliance. But that gets to the real root of Sarah's fears, because she knows that Hannah isn't just a dalliance for her. Solomon assures her that whatever her feelings for Hannah are, the devil can't be invited in by chance. It has to be a deliberate choice, and Sarah hasn't made that choice. Screaming breaks out back in the town, and Sarah and Solomon arrive to discover that the pastor has locked at least a dozen children in the church with himself, and people are trying to break in to free their children, and it's then that Sarah realizes she doesn't know where Henry is. With the help of a few other guys, Solomon is able to break open a side door of the church, and then he then tells those guys to keep everyone else out while he grabs a pitchfork and goes inside. Inside of the church, he finds all of the children sitting in pews while Cyrus stands at the pulpit muttering under his breath. When Solomon sees something on the floor, he kneels down and... Yep, that's a pile of eyeballs. With this horrifying discovery, he looks around and sees that Cyrus has cut out the eyes of all of the children before blinding himself with a big metal hook. The rest of the town rushes into the church, and as Sarah is kneeling over Henry's body, Cyrus, even in his blinded state, begins to advance upon her when Solomon impales him with the pitchfork and kills him. Thomas, always one to help make an already terrible situation even worse, immediately begins screaming about witchcraft, because of course he does. At a town meeting that night, we see Sarah and Hannah listening in from outside while Jacob Berman is saying they must root out the cause of this evil. Solomon tries to be the voice of reason, saying that the man who caused this is now dead, but he's quickly talked over in favor of everyone else's conviction that Pastor Miller was possessed. Thomas quickly incites even more of a panic by telling everyone about the party in the woods, insisting that their children will bear the devil's mark if they're guilty. The town works itself up into even more of a frenzy until Solomon scolds them for their speculation and lack of proof, until Caleb claims that he does have proof. Angered about his rejection by Hannah, he now claims that Sarah and Hannah came to him during a full moon and lured him into the woods, showing him proof of their pact with the devil. It very quickly turns into a, pardon the pun, witch hunt, as the men in town begin claiming that they've seen Sarah and Hannah with the devil and that they're witches. Caleb spots the two of them through the window, and they are forced to run away as the men begin to chase after them. The men manage to catch Hannah, and Sarah flees into the woods. The town, now in a full religious frenzy, organizes a mob to search for Sarah, and her friends and Solomon look on horrified. Sarah sneaks back to her house and finds her father unconscious outside, but when Jacob and Caleb emerge from her home, she's forced to hide and sneak off again. Once again proving that she is more loyal than me, instead of fleeing, Sarah sneaks back to the meeting house and distracts the guard outside so she can slip inside, where she finds Hannah chained up. Hannah tells her that she's going to be hanged the next day, and she says that Sarah must run so she doesn't meet the same fate. Hannah rightly observes that whether they communed with the devil or not, everyone believes they did, so they're seen as guilty anyway. Sarah does not take the right message away from this. She decides to return to the widow's house and make a deal with the devil for real, hoping that that will be able to save them. Congratulations on your self-fulfilling prophecy, Union. You just made yourselves a bona fide witch. Sarah sneaks into Mary's house, but the book is no longer in the box, which is now covered in blood. She is startled by this and trips and falls, landing on the floor beside Widow Mary's body, whose throat has been cut. She flees through the woods and gets back to Solomon's house, and she pleads with him to believe her that she and Hannah are innocent before telling him about finding Mary's body. She then tells him about the book, and she now believes that someone else has used it to make a deal with the devil. He does believe her, but several men from the town arrive then, and Sarah is forced to hide as they force their way inside the house to search for her. While Solomon confronts Caleb, Sarah sneaks into the basement down below, and she finds a small stone room set off from everything else. And what does she find in the room? Oh, just the witch's mark carved into the floor and a goat's severed head beside it. And let me just say, I knew it. That son of a bitch was way too supportive and way too quick to believe her about her innocence. Anyway, so, beside the witch's mark, she also finds Mary's book open to the page about the deal with the devil. Solomon finds her there then, and we see a flashback of him killing Mary, taking the book and making the deal, as well as learning that he was the one who saw Sarah and Hannah in the woods together. So, now that we've seen all this, we now know that the witch's house and basement in part 2 were actually Solomon's house all along, not Sarah's. Solomon insists that he is still the same person. He was just tired of fortune always overlooking him. He wanted power and prosperity of his own, and he reveals that he sacrificed Cyrus Miller in exchange for that, saying that sacrificing one person every few years is a small price to pay for what he wants. Of course, Sarah points out that it wasn't just one life, because Cyrus then went on to kill 12 innocent children. Solomon rejects that, saying that no one is really innocent, as evidenced by the town who is now so quick to forsake Sarah and hunt her. He implores Sarah to understand that she's different, she's like him, and Sarah responds by stabbing him in the stomach. So, a strong counterpoint there. As she tries to run past him, Solomon strikes her in the head with a rock, and she swings a torch at him in order to escape. And in doing so, we see the same flash of Sarah Fierce screaming that we have seen in various visions throughout part 1 and 2, but we now have the full context for it and see that in a different light. Apparently the people of Union and Shadyside are great at shaking off traumatic abdomen wounds, because Solomon gets back up and grabs the knife that Sarah dropped and follows her into the maze of caverns that we recognize from part 2. While Solomon has well and truly snapped and is screaming for Sarah to come back to him, Sarah runs across the heart of the cavern and that pulsing tissue that we saw in part 2, and she looks rightfully disgusted by it. Sarah finally finds the part of the cave that has a wall that leads up to the outdoors, which is where the outhouse was in part 2, and she tries to climb the wall to escape. Unfortunately, rock climbing isn't easy on the best of days, much less when you are wearing a dress and cloak and dealing with the head wound. So Solomon catches up to her and throws her to the ground, and they struggle while Solomon professes his love for Sarah, because of course he does. Of course, when Sarah fights back too much for his liking, that love doesn't stop Solomon from trying to stab her. Sarah tries to block the blow with her wrist, which almost completely severs her hand off in a very gory display, but don't worry, the fight finishes the job with her hand getting ripped the rest of the way off and resting at the bottom of the Satan stone. Sarah escapes and bandages her wrist with part of her cloak, but she is now lost in a dark maze of caverns and dealing with a lot of blood loss, so she does eventually make her way through the cave to where it leads up to the church, and she manages to kick her way up through the floorboards and crawl into the building. Girl is really not looking good as she stumbles her way outside and spots Hannah chained up to the town well outside now. I don't really know what her game plan is here, but I guess when you're dealing with that much trauma and blood loss, planning is not really high on your priority list. Unfortunately, that is the exact moment that Solomon catches up to her and grabs her, screaming that he has caught the witch. What an absolute top-tier bastard. I hope that stab wound is really hurting right about now. The town takes Sarah and Hannah out to the hanging tree, once again working themselves up into a frenzy as they scream at the girls to confess to witchcraft. Once again, we see that there is nothing our teen lesbian hero won't do for love. She does confess to witchcraft and takes sole responsibility for all of it, claiming that she bewitched Hannah, clearly trying to save Hannah from the same fate. That does work at least, as Hannah is released, but Sarah has now sealed her own fate. She then has to deal with the added indignity of Solomon being the one who wraps her in chains in preparation for her hanging, but she promises him that the truth will come out one day and that the truth will be his curse. She then promises to follow him for all eternity and never let him go, and considering that we make it all the way up to 1994 in the series, girl knows how to keep a promise. Sarah is hanged with the whole town watching and her friends looking on, distraught and heartbroken. We then learn that it was Hannah, Lizzie, Isaac, and Abigail who moved her body from beneath the hanging tree. In order to give Sarah a proper burial, they dug up her grave, leaving behind that etched stone that said, "The witch forever lives," before moving her body to a new grave that no one else would know about. Hannah places the flower crown that she was wearing the night they kissed in the woods in the grave with Sarah, and we then see a time lapse of that same plant growing over the grave and in various places all around Shadyside. And we then recognize that it's the same reddish moss that we've seen all throughout the series thus far. We cut back to the moment of Sarah's hanging, and as the rest of the town disperses, Hannah is the only one who remains at the hanging tree, falling to the ground as she looks up at Sarah. Wow, so that's pretty messed up, huh? Back in 1994, Dina reels back as she finishes seeing all of this from the past, finally understanding the real story of Sarah Fier. We hear sirens approaching in the distance, and just to make Dina's night even better, it's Sheriff Nick Good. With that, we are officially in 1994, Part 2. So, Fear Street, Part 3, 1666, 1994, Part 2. Wow, that's not confusing at all. Nick approaches Josh at the car, asking what he's doing out there in the middle of the night. Dina runs up and pulls Josh back into the woods with her, and Nick pulls his gun on them as they run off. So, nothing malicious going on there. While Nick searches for them in the woods, Josh and Dina hide, and she tells him that the Good family line is evil. Who could have seen this coming? Did they write the whole series just so they could include the line "good is evil"? Who knows? They manage to sneak around Nick and get back to the road where they steal his police car. Dina then tells Josh the truth about Sarah. Sarah wasn't a witch, but the Good family has been trading the people of Shadyside for generations as part of this deal with the devil in order to maintain their power in the town. Throughout the years, we learn that the Good family has been giving names to the devil, and those people are the ones who become possessed and go on killing sprees. Through this deal, the Goods get what they want, and Sunnyvale continues to thrive, while Shadyside only gets worse and worse. So while they thought before that Sarah Fier was sending killers after them, they now know that it was Nick doing it in order to protect his family's secret. Josh points out that if the killers were after them before, now that they know the secret, it's only going to get worse. And boy is he right, because we cut to a lot more figures rising up from the black ooze and that pulsing heartbeat down in the cave. Dina and Josh make it back to Ziggy's house where she is guarding over Sam, who is still as possessed and unrelenting as ever. Unfortunately, they now have to tell Ziggy the truth. Ziggy looks understandably shell-shocked as she thinks back on all of the bonding moments that she shared with Nick and the affection she held for him back in 1978, only to now be faced with the knowledge that he was responsible for her sister's death. Dina then says what we are all thinking at this point. They have to kill Nick Good. Unfortunately, that's when Ziggy reveals that she called Nick before thinking he could help. That means the kids have to bail right now. Once they manage to subdue Sam and get her back in the car, Dina, Josh, and Ziggy go to pay a visit to the Shadyside Mall janitor, Martin, who Josh helped before. And let me just say, Martin is so quick to jump on board with the plan to kill Nick Good. I am loving it. At the Shadyside Mall, Martin is explaining the metal roll-down gates that are on the front of all of the stores, which can be rigged for a quick release. Their plan is to use Dina's blood to lure the killers into the stores and then trap them there with the gates, which will then free them up to face Sheriff Good alone. Ziggy is finally getting her a woman scorned moment about 2 decades late because she decides that they will carry Nick Good. Yes, that's right, carry as in the Stephen King book, because since that was a bonding moment between the two of them back at camp, this woman clearly loves a bit of dramatic irony, and I respect that about her. While they're preparing for their plan, Dina and Josh share a really touching moment where he tells her about the Konami code, saying that that's what helps him get through when things are really tough. And it sounds really nerdy, and it is, but it's also really sweet and kind of pitch perfect for the 90s time period. Dina then gives them a really dramatic pep talk about how they're going to save Shadyside, and again, it's also kind of cheesy, but also kind of perfect for what this series is as a whole. We see a whole montage of the four of them rigging up the mall in preparation for their plan, and when they flip off the power, we see that they have transformed the whole mall into a blacklight spray paint extravaganza. Unfortunately, the people who arrive at the mall are not the killers, but are instead two cops who corner the four of them. Or I should at least say that the cops get there first, because the cop who has Ziggy and Martin cornered very suddenly gets intimately acquainted with the ice pick or whatever it is of one of the killers. The other officer unloads a clip into the killer, but as we have seen before, that is not something that's even remotely going to slow him down, and he very quickly kills the second cop too. Josh, Ziggy, and Martin all take up their posts at different storefronts, while Dina runs back to the pizza place where Sam is tied up and starts spraying herself with a bunch of different perfumes and colognes. Once the killers walk into the stores, they release the metal gates and trap them inside before running off to different stores to repeat the process with different killers. Once they have several of the killers trapped, they all meet up back at the pizza place where they realize that everything has gotten way too quiet. And that's because our favorite sheriff is here to join us. Ziggy is waiting for Nick at the hanging tree in the mall, and it's clear that there is a lot left unsaid between the two of them. Ziggy's not interested in any of that, though, so in true Carrie fashion, she drops a bucket on him and runs away. A bucket that happens to be a mixture of neon paint and Dina's blood. Nick does grab Ziggy, though, and holds her hostage between him and the monsters, demanding that they get the killers away from him or Ziggy will die too. But man, a cop should really be better about checking his six, because Skullmask then puts a fun knife in his back from behind. Unfortunately, in the scuffle, Dina's blood got on Ziggy too, so another killer goes after Ziggy while Nick struggles with Skullmask. In order to save Ziggy, Dina quickly cuts her own hand open to lure the killers, and Nick runs away. Dina chases after Nick, and in another beautiful horror convention, Dina has to walk down a dark hallway while an emergency alarm blares and the lights strobe on and off rhythmically. Realizing that a metal grate in the floor covers the same spot where Sarah emerged from the caverns into the church before, Dina moves the grate and crawls down into the caverns. What the hell is going on with the architectural planning of this town? Did they just leave a bunch of open shafts that lead down into underground caverns just in a bunch of buildings in their town and just cover them with a few grates? We see Nick staggering through the cave because, a stab wound to the spine isn't something you just walk off, while Dina tries to track him down. Back in the mall, the other three try to slow the killers down by spraying each of them down with more of that paint and blood mixture, and from there things quickly turn into WrestleMania Shadyside edition, with the killers absolutely wailing on each other in a brawl in the mall. A mall brawl. Freddy versus Jason could never. Bad news though, in the middle of the melee, Josh sees that Sam has gotten loose and she runs off through the mall to chase after Dina. Even worse news, even more killers start showing up, including Ruby Lane. And in the worst news, the three of them are now all out of the paint and blood mixture to use against the rest of the killers. Josh starts trying to figure out a new strategy, and Martin suggests they just wait it out. But Josh insists that they have come too far and too many people have died to just quit now. So even if the others aren't going to join them, he picks up the Camp Nightwing killer's axe and goes to deal with the rest of the killers. Back in the cavern, Nick taunts Dina that she can't stop something his family has been cultivating for 300 years. We see a few quick cuts of Dina and Josh both reciting the Konami code before Josh attacks Ruby Lane with the axe, and Sam startles Dina and attacks her. Ruby breaks Josh's arm in the fray, and we see that Sam has gotten the upper hand on Dina and is choking her out while Dina begs her to stop. There's clearly some part of Sam still conscious in there, because we see a flash of her remembering a bunch of moments that she shared with Dina in the past, and that's enough to get her to loosen her grip a little bit. And Dina, not one to pass up an opportunity, uses this moment to knock Sam out. In the mall, Josh is saved when Ziggy and Martin show up, and Ziggy shoots Ruby Lane in the head. Don't get too comfortable though, because as Dina struggles to catch her breath, Nick is standing over her with the knife she dropped before, and the killers are starting to regenerate already back in the mall. Nick stabs Dina in the stomach, and really I think at this point this series has set some sort of record for abdominal stab wounds. Ziggy quickly uses up the rest of her bullets, but it really doesn't do much of anything to slow the killers down at this point. Meanwhile, Nick has the knife to Dina's throat as he taunts her, saying that he is going to frame her for all of these deaths and he will be hailed as a hero. Dina clearly hates this plan as much as I do because she grabs Nick's hand and forces it onto like the pulsing heartbeat tissue beside them, which floods him with a bunch of visions of Shadyside killings of the past. He also hears Sarah's voice in his head repeating that promise she made to Solomon about the truth being his curse and how she will follow him forever. Although he sees it as a vision of Sarah Fear, Dina suddenly appears and stabs him right through the eye, killing him instantly and simultaneously destroying all of the monsters up above. Sam is starting to revive as Dina gets to her, and honestly, I am happy for y'all and all that, but I don't know that I would be kissing up on each other right now. Like, y'all are covered in so much blood and God knows what else right now. But when Sam asks if Dina is okay, we learn that, hey, someone has actually learned from this series' fixation on stabbing people in the stomach. Dina opens the big coat she was wearing to reveal a makeshift vest made out of books taped together which protected her from the knife. As the girls make their way out of the cave, we see the names of all of the past killers disappear from the stone wall, and then the witch's mark disappears from where it was etched into the floor. When they leave out of the exit that was once Solomon's basement, we see that the Goods have built their mansion right over this exit because they come up right in the middle of the Good home. The girls leave out of the front door, and honestly, I have to keep reminding myself that this is horror, not true crime, because I kept being like, please, girls, please stop leaving footprints and fingerprints all over a sheriff's house. As soon as they walk out into the Sunnyvale neighborhood, we see that the good fortune Sunnyvale has enjoyed for so many generations is already gone because a man backs out of his driveway and is immediately hit by a garbage truck. We then cut to a news report that is detailing about how more evidence is being uncovered about Nick Good being the Sunnyvale serial killer. In the aftermath, we see Dina and Josh share a moment in their home before they head out for school, and we then see Ziggy standing at Mary Lane's front door, offering out the notebook that she has put together through the years before she hugs Mary. In a very cute moment, once he gets to school, Josh is talking to Martin and a group of kids when a girl signs his cast with the same screen name of the girl that he has been talking to about Shadyside conspiracies in an AOL chat room for so long. At the spot where they found Sarah's body, Dina and Sam meet up, with Dina bringing the cheeseburger she promised in part 1, because she knows the cardinal rule that you don't ever let your girlfriend get hangry. On the stone beside where Sarah was laid to rest, they etch a small memorial to her before they share a sweet moment and a well-earned kiss. And just like that, the saga of Shadyside has come to an end. Or has it? Interspersed with the credits, the camera leads us through the Shadyside Mall and down into the cavern below once again, where we see the witch's book resting on the floor, surrounded by police tape and evidence markers, right before we see a pair of hands appear and suddenly grab it and pull it out of frame. And just like that, we have reached the end of our Fear Street trilogy. I will admit that I had the most reservations about part 3. With the 1666 time period, it was always going to be the most tonally different, because even though 1994 and 1978 are still their own distinctive time periods, they are still within less than 2 decades of each other, and they are still relatively modern, comparatively speaking, to 1666. But I have to give them kudos for it because they did fully commit to recreating the 1666 time period when it could have easily veered into being poorly done. The series is a bit cheesy overall, but please understand that I do not mean that in a negative way at all. It is cheesy in the same way that a lot of really fun, good horror is a bit campy, and that is even more understandable considering this series' roots in the juvenile fiction book series. But please just understand that when I say cheesy, I mean it with all of the love and all of the adoration and nostalgia for a lot of horror that strikes that same tone. Also, as a small note, the soundtracks for this whole series are honestly terrific. You got less of it with part 3 since a good chunk of it is set in 1666, but it is very clear that with the 94 and 78 eras, a lot of thought went into curating the soundtracks for each respective one, and it perfectly sets the tone for each of the eras of this trilogy. Overall, I think this is a really terrific trilogy of movies. They created a fun lore for Shadyside, and its history lent itself really well to an enjoyable story, and they also managed to create a great cast of characters across the entire series that were really fun and engaging and relatable and easy to root for, in my opinion. This series as a whole really managed to capture the feeling of old slasher flicks and horror movies of eras past, if you ask me. And I honestly love that. That's the kind of horror I grew up on. And I just, like, the roots of that are so fun. So it's so rewarding to see a trilogy recapture that old feeling today. So yeah, those are just a few of my thoughts overall. I thought it was a really fun series. I could easily see myself revisiting in the future. I did watch all of these on my own as they released, but honestly, I could see this being such a fun group movie night series. That would be so fun. It has a great vibe for that, just like getting a bunch of snacks and hanging out with your friends and watching just some fun, campy horror. That's going to do it for us today, guys. Please give this video a like if you enjoyed it, and please share any of your thoughts down below, whether it is about the trilogy as a whole or about specific parts or elements of it. Honestly, any thoughts you want to share, I am so happy to talk about this trilogy. If you enjoy my content, you can always subscribe, and if you do, be sure to hit that bell icon so you're notified anytime I upload. But other than that, I've been Randa, this has been the Southern Fried Nerd, and I hope you have a great day. See ya!